Hello, the topic I chose for my course paper is Open Data in Policing. The thesis of my paper is while open government and open data can raise data privacy and security issues, a police service should implement an initiative such as this because doing so can promote transparency, increase access to data, and have a positive impact on the community. The policing profession impacts society in many ways, including the way the officers perform their duties and how they respond to the community. When you combine this with issues such as sensitive types of records the police hold, it's no wonder that figuring out ways to be accountable and transparent is complex. For my paper, I begin with a general discussion of open government and open data for some background information. Next, I'll narrow my research further and begin to concentrate on open data as an offshoot of open government and its implementation in Canada, looking much more closely at law enforcement. I reviewed some Canadian agencies and some from other jurisdictions, including the US and the UK. After exploring how open data is applied in various agencies, I began to look at how privacy can be adhered to while making data open, and ways in which open data can be applied to a police service. I also explore some of the benefits and challenges to open data initiatives. Part 1. Open Government in Canada. What is open government and open data? As our society has progressed, technology is quite rampant, and information is so easily within reach on the internet. Researchers are no longer restricted to accessing information by spending hours in a library. Technology also enables easier access to citizens. They can obtain services electronically now. It is no wonder that these factors have led to an increased desire to have information more widely available. Through my research, I read in an article about the usability of open data that the US was one of the first countries to mandate the use of it, and the UK followed shortly after. Open government and open data are tools that can be used to achieve transparency and accountability. These tools can be applied in a variety of different manners. It's important to note that open data and open government can be put into place independently of each other. An open government initiative can be defined as when a government seeks to have its operations transparent to the public, to hold it accountable for its actions. The accountability portion can be complemented by the implementation of an oversight body and/or putting regulations in place, often in the form of legislation. In an Ontario context, the Information and Privacy Commissioner is one such oversight body. Open data can be described as data or data sets that are openly available to the public and are usually free of charge. Agencies in many countries are becoming more open and accessible. Within these nations, there is a drive for the public sector to be open, perhaps largely driven by the fact that public sector agencies, by definition, exist to serve the public and are publicly funded. Canada is no exception. Our government has a commitment to openness and accountability. The Government of Canada developed its second action plan on open government in 2014. The first was launched in 2012. Part of this action plan is to broaden access to data and information. To further promote transparency and accountability, the government has issued a directive in October 2014 to maximize the government information that is released. This outlines requirements, including monitoring and reporting requirements, consequences, and responsibilities. There is an expectation that data which is valuable to businesses will by default be made open. The Open Government Portal was developed for this purpose. As an example, the RCMP Open Government Implementation Plan is one of the items published on this portal. It describes their objective to maximize the release of government information and data of business value to support transparency, accountability, citizen engagement, and socioeconomic benefits. It's also useful to note that the objective of the government's directive includes the terminology of business value. This will come into play later on during a discussion of what data and information can be made open. Part 2. Police open data in Canada. Now I'd like to switch the focus to the use of open data in policing. I will compare and look more in detail at how a few agencies have put this initiative in place. Not surprisingly, Ontario also has an open data initiative. Requirements outlined in Ontario's Digital and Data Directive 2021 include that ministries and provincial agencies be fully transparent about their data assets, and the data assets are open by default unless exempted from release in limited and specific circumstances. Some exemptions to publishing data include personal or sensitive information. The first agency I will discuss is the RCMP, which is a federal law enforcement agency. As already described, it is participating in open government and has its own open government implementation plan, which describes their existing situation of open data and their relationship with Stats Canada. Crime data is shared and contributes to numerous reports that are published through Stats Canada. Other information published by the RCMP includes publications, crime prevention material, public safety awareness material, and annual reports. And the plan recognizes that improvements can still be made with the opening of data. I found that Alberta RCMP provides quite a lot of data on select crime statistics throughout their province and by detachment, but it seems that information sharing is not consistent across RCMP locations in other provinces. The Toronto Police Service was a great example to look at because they have developed a public safety data portal, the objective of which is to improve the understanding of policing, improve transparency, and enhance confidence through the creation and use of open data for public safety in Toronto. The website has a catalog that lists the different types of data they make available, which includes downloadable datasets, interactive dashboards, maps, and reports. You can also explore datasets by category. They share their annual statistical report, police budget, and field information reports also. Their data does not include personal identifying details, and the location of police incidents is set to the nearest intersection to prevent identifying a specific street address. Toronto Police worked with the Privacy Commissioner to ensure the data meets privacy and security standards. Some other police services I looked at include the Vancouver Police Department, Waterloo Regional Police, and Windsor Police. Vancouver publishes strategic business plans, annual reports, some police initiatives, policies, organizational information, publications, and community satisfaction surveys. Some of their information is available on their Planning, Research, and Audit section. Also, from 2007 onward, they have made Freedom of Information requests available to the public when the information being requested is in the public interest or useful to the public. They also have a crime stats dashboard and crime maps available to the public. The Waterloo Regional Police Service publishes a larger variety of reports, including annual reports, operation and strategic business plans, member census survey, and budget documents. They also provide datasets on criminal offense summaries, occurrence data, regulated interactions, and intelligence notes, and they publish occurrence information on a crime map. In addition, which is quite useful, we have a public information index directory of records, which provides an overview of different types of records maintained, who internally has access to them, and the retention information. The Windsor Police Service does make some statistical data available for use. The types of data included are homicide and crime statistics, and a police incident dashboard that displays data over the last 2 years. They also publish their annual report. Part 3, Police Open Data in Other Jurisdictions. Next, I will look at some other jurisdictions to see what we can learn from them and how the open data initiatives compare. The US, as described earlier, was one of the first nations to adopt an open government initiative. As open government progressed, they developed a police data initiative in 2014, which came out of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. Goals of the task force included to reduce crime, and the report's recommendations placed emphasis on how data and technology could improve police outcomes and foster trust. Interestingly, the actual uptake of open data among U.S. police departments occurred rather slowly. As reported by Time magazine in 2016, an update provided a year into the initiative indicated that at least 9 states and municipalities have begun to implement the recommendations. But given the large number of police departments throughout the U.S., being just under 18,000, this uptake is not considerable. The numbers have since increased to approximately 140 departments. That is still only approximately 0.008% of all U.S. departments. The U.S. Police Data Initiative website provides a centralized location for information relating to the open data movement. It contains a list of participating agencies, direct links to the agency's open data pages, an interactive listing of published datasets from around the country, as well as important resources on police open data. The types of information contained in the datasets varies across agencies. Some list specific addresses where an arrest took place, and details such as whether the arrest was a warrant arrest or citation and release. This federal approach to and support of open data makes accessing the datasets extremely user-friendly. Further, they have the Freedom of Information Act, which states that federal agencies are required to make available for public inspection specific categories of records. An important point to note here is that this legislation is federal, and as such it does not apply to state-level police agencies. In my opinion, to be most successful as a nation, similar legislation or collaboration should exist across the entire nation. The UK's open data approach began with the release of the Open Government Licence in 2010. It was one of the earlier countries to adopt the International Open Data Charter. The UK has proved to be an excellent source for information for my research on the open data movement. Their drive for open data became widely known and largely began with a campaign by The Guardian, an online UK newspaper. The Free Our Data campaign was about making data available to taxpayers. In the early stages of making information more available to citizens, they began with crime information and maps available to the public. But the data was described as disjoined with datasets in various formats. The National Policing Improvement Agency was commissioned to help police forces by providing expertise. The types of data that is made available in the UK includes crime maps on the websites for each police force. In the UK there are 43 police forces, crime stats, freedom of information requests, policies and procedures, policing plan, and budgets. In the UK, the openness is also being marketed by the government with a nationwide approach, similar to the US. From my research, it seems the biggest success in the UK is the National Data Portal and the Crime Maps website, which is a centralized website that allows users to go to crime maps of any police service in the UK. Other UK open data guidance includes a 2009 report in which the government issued 7 public data principles. 2 of these include public data will be available and easy to find through a single easy-to-use access point, and personal, classified, commercially sensitive, and third-party data will continue to be protected. As we can see, the UK has been quite forthcoming in information in the open data movement. Part 4, Applying Open Data to a Police Service. Now that we've looked at examples of how open data is being used by law enforcement in Canada and other jurisdictions, I want to turn the discussion to applying open data to a police service. It's important to note that previous examples of data published by the agencies mentioned earlier do not contain any personal or sensitive information. From an Ontario perspective, this is due in part to the legislation which specifically identifies that exemptions to such types of open data are allowed under Ontario's Digital and Data Directive 2021. A record is defined in Canada's Access to Information Act as documentary material regardless of medium or form, and the definition of a record is further defined in the Ontario Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, or MFIPA, as any record of information, however recorded, whether in printed form, on film, by electronic means, or otherwise. Police services, while they are a government organization, are unique in the fact that they have control over a vast amount of personal information. Much of the time, the information the police has was gathered when citizens were experiencing some of their worst days. That makes data related to police matters sensitive on a much larger level. A police service should evaluate the records they hold and whether they can be made open due to things such as sensitivity, an ongoing criminal investigation, or the presence of personal information. General information was frequently shared by all agencies, although the types of general information published varies quite a lot. We already discussed several different types of information when looking at the police services earlier. They include things such as annual reports, business plans, and workforce information. Another common method of open data is crime mapping. Most agencies I explored participate in this type of information sharing. Although the crime mapping is sometimes labeled as an incident dashboard or other terminology, they are similar information. An excellent example of crime mapping on a national level is the UK, which was discussed a bit earlier. Information can easily be accessed by going to the National Policing website and searching by area. Locating this information for RCMP agencies in Canada was not quite as successful. They police different types of jurisdictions depending on the province, so this is not surprising. In Ontario, as the RCMP does not have much involvement in municipal policing, crime mapping is more useful by going to the individual municipal policing agencies. In contrast to Ontario, the RCMP has quite an extensive crime mapping page for Alberta. Another type of police records is access to information requests. Access to information held by a government agency has been possible in Canada since the creation of the Access to Information Act and MPIPA. The purpose of these legislations are to enhance the accountability and transparency of federal institutions, to promote an open and democratic society, and to provide a right to access of information under the control of institutions and protect the privacy of individuals. Providing access to police records isn't new, but the drive and complexity has become much bigger. As we think about open data as data or data sets that are openly available to the public, we can begin to understand how open data is bigger than access to information requests. Proactive disclosure, to me, is a very interesting method that I hadn't heard about before. It can be used to apply open data principles to access to information requests. The Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner for BC, British Columbia, holds the position that proactive disclosure of records by public bodies is the preferred means to achieve openness and transparency. This method is actually part of the legislation in BC, but not yet in Ontario. The BC Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, Section 71, states that a head of a public body shall establish categories of records that can be made available to the public without submitting a request for access. It does have exemptions to this, including records that contain personal information. This falls nicely in line with the principle of open by default. Therefore, I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of open data. That method of releasing information is most suitable for requests for general information, and is a technique of making it available and accessible to citizens. The use of body-worn cameras by law enforcement agencies has increased. The rules of use and how the footage is stored, disclosed, and destroyed varies quite a bit. They have been adopted for many reasons, including to achieve greater accountability and transparency. The footage becomes a record, and like any other record, they can be the subject of an access to information request. In addition, there could be a call for greater access to these records in line with an open data movement. There was a study conducted in 2018 which analyzed the Seattle Police Department's public social media archive of police interactions and sought to examine the usability of the archive and its value in the context of visibility and police transparency. The archive is where the Seattle Police Department provided access to police videos online as a way to hold the officers publicly accountable and to help manage requests for records by offering previews of the footage. Results showed there were low levels of interaction from members of the public, and 60% of the videos were never viewed. This study can prove useful for a police service when determining whether to make their footage available for public view. To include body-worn camera footage as open data, a police service must examine the video. If it doesn't contain personal information, it could potentially be released unredacted. Footage that does contain personal information could be considered for release after applying redactions to it. A service can further categorize the videos, for example, to see if they are relevant to an ongoing criminal investigation, and then apply the rules of access accordingly. Police data sets are frequently made available for download, and dashboards are used to display crime information and statistics. These tools can be informative for the general public, but can also be used to conduct in-depth analysis and prediction tools for researchers, media, or other academic purposes. This type of information is commonly shared in an open data initiative. But to comply with the privacy rules, it must first be de-identified. This is important to protect privacy, as the data sets stem from police interactions and police records. The Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario has released a number of excellent reports and documentation about open government programs. On the topic of protecting privacy, they cautioned that the amount of de-identification required should be proportional to the risk created by releasing the data. The level of risk depends on the sensitivity of the data, the number of data subjects involved, and how the data will be released. A police service should make sure to also assess and mitigate the risks of re-identification before publishing the data. Now I'd like to talk about some benefits and challenges to open data in policing. Part 5. How does open government contribute to accountability and transparency? What is the benefit of increasing public access to data? The first benefit I would like to talk about is greater community engagement and awareness. Public sector organizations can be susceptible to public scrutiny. Opening of data can provide citizens with insight into the organization, which helps to build trust and transparency. For example, if citizens can read reports on an organization's budget or business plan, they will be more aware of what budget dollars are spent on and the types of activities police use their resources for. Increasing transparency of police information can go a long way in improving community trust. Second, opening data sets to make them accessible to anyone free of charge enables greater reuse of the data. This can be useful for citizens who collect and work with data such as researchers and media outlets. As described earlier, public sector data can be viewed as being generated for the public use, and publishing data sets of frequently requested information can help members of the public easily conduct their own inquiries. Thirdly, a benefit associated to the second item just spoken about is reduction in use of resources. If an organization sets up datasets to be automatically published to their website, it could take very little resources to maintain it. In addition to datasets, proactively publishing information can reduce requests for information submitted to an organization. For example, if a police agency publishes freedom of information requests that can be accessed by anyone, it could reduce individual requests for such information being submitted, thereby reducing the toll they can take on an organization's resources. It is important to mention this with a caveat, as this can be double-edged. A smaller organization, or one that does not have the resources to implement open data, might find an open data initiative to be resource restrictive. Open data can be used to increase accountability in a number of ways. Police services are subject to freedom of information legislation and requests, and the service can increase accountability by routinely publishing such requests, including any appeals or orders that have resulted from them. Having these available means the public can peruse on their own accord to learn what information others have requested and how, if applicable, police services are being held accountable by the relevant oversight bodies. Now to move on to discuss a couple challenges to open data. Although data is becoming more widely available, there remains questions about its usability. Data released in its raw format is more usable by experts with scientific technical knowledge. Regular citizens would not get as much value out of it. Another factor that can influence the usability is the file formats. A service should consider their audience when developing open data initiatives and plan for this. A service must also aim to identify if the published information is actually valuable, and that can be a driver for choosing what information to share. A police service should consider how to measure the value of a dataset when developing their initiative. This point can also be attached to a conversation about community engagement, if a service seeks the community's involvement to determine what data to share. The second challenge I want to mention is budget and resource limitations. If an agency sought to implement an open data initiative from scratch, there could be significant initial costs. This challenge could potentially be mitigated if the initiative was undertaken collaboratively with other agencies or, on a national level, but a smaller agency attempting this on their own may not be able to overcome such a challenge. As we have seen examples of national strategies in use, such as the UK, who has a centralized website for police open data, I would hope that countries which seek to open government and its data would support all public bodies in the process, and in turn, take some of the burden off of individual agencies. Part 6. Privacy and Open Government. Now I would like to talk about how privacy and open government are related. As we have seen throughout these discussions, privacy professionals are keenly involved in the topic of open data and open government initiatives. They support and advocate for increasing public access to government information to allow for government transparency and accountability, and provide input and guidance on how government can achieve this while adhering to privacy legislation. We have seen that legislation on freedom of information contains similar principles in the UK, the US, and Canada. In Ontario, open government is endorsed by the IPC, who believes it enhances transparency of government actions and decisions, and the public has the right to access the records and proceedings of government. Additionally, a police agency adheres to privacy principles when handling and managing records. This will certainly help them to gain public confidence and trust. Most of the freedom of information legislation reviewed in this paper allows exemptions for personal and other sensitive information. It should not be too hard to implement an open data initiative. We've seen there are many types of police information that contain only general information. The extra layer of care required for police records that did once contain personal information would be the biggest obstacle, as once data is made open, by definition, it is accessible across the world with no barriers. This risk must be mitigated by a police agency. Observing basic privacy principles all throughout the agency's data collection and data life cycle would be an exceptional first step in mitigating this risk. A police agency should seek out privacy principles and guidelines in their jurisdiction to help inform their shift to an open data initiative, as well as their regular practices. Part 7. Recommendations. After analyzing the earlier information, I am proposing the following recommendations that a police service should follow when developing and implementing an open data initiative. Number 1. Establish a national framework and guidelines for all police services to follow. We have seen examples of how other jurisdictions made open data available to citizens with a centralized approach. Both the UK and the US, with differing success, have a centralized data portal that lists the police services that are participating in open data and provides a link to the data. The first step in implementing an open data initiative should be to determine whether police services can work together nationally, or at the very least, collaborate with other police services or government agencies that they already have partnerships and relationships with. Agencies often work together and share information. The concerns with data protection, anonymization, and file formats would be much easier to tackle with a collaborative approach. It could also be more resource efficient, instead of each individual police service using their own resources. Number 2, consistency across agencies. When developing a national framework, consistency may occur naturally. The level of consistency could depend on how involved an agency's open data initiative is. When reviewing Canadian police agencies, I found it difficult to identify and locate the various types of data available. Some had an open data page, others had the information on branch pages. To achieve greater ease of use by citizens, a police service should publish information in a consistent way, such as a page dedicated to open data. Number 3, ease of use. I recommend presenting the information in a consistent way, making it user-friendly and searchable. As I mentioned before when reviewing police services websites, locating the information was not easy or consistent. On the WRPS website, most of the information is contained on the reports, publications, and surveys page, but the Public Information Index Directory of Records is located on the Access to Information page. To make it simpler, they should have one open data page. The The WPS website Open Data page stated that the types of statistical data it offers include marijuana grow operations. Yet, there was no link for that. When entering that term in the search bar, the results bring up a link that provides information on what grow-ops are, but no link to open data for it. To be of most assistance to citizens, a police service should clearly identify all types of data and data sets that are available by providing a searchable directory or record of records or index. Number 4, open data by default. Part of the Government of Canada's Action Plan on Open Government includes an expectation that data will be made open by default, while there are exemptions as it relates to personal information. A police service should conduct an assessment of the data they hold with the goal to make all of it accessible unless there is a justification to exclude it. Consider what information can be routinely released, either proactively or on demand. If information is identified that cannot be made open, consider dedicating a section of the Open Data portal to explain what information is not available and why. Additionally, a police service could consider redacting portions of records that are not releasable. For example, when releasing body-worn camera footage, identifiable images could be blurred. Number 5, accessibility. The police service should be accessible to the community and provide a means for citizens to make contact. The data portal should identify who to get in touch with, including contact information, to inquire about the service's datasets, open data policies, or even to provide feedback, or request access to new datasets. Number 6, informative. The datasets provided should be organized and include information such as the name of the police service who published it, when the dataset first became available electronically, the date it was posted, the frequency with which it will be updated, and the date it stopped being published, if applicable. Another related point to consider in providing informative data is being responsive to the public. Consider the public interest, as displayed by access to information requests or public outcry, when determining what data to make public. If part of the open data principle is to increase the public's access, this should form part of the conversation. Part 8, points for further discussion. The above recommendations I would suggest as beginning steps for a police service to implement an open data initiative. But further to that, I'd like to share some insights that I gained from my research as additional discussion points. The first point to open up for discussion is about broadening the scope of data beyond specifically police data. From looking at the UK and US examples, I learned that some police agencies include data on what happened after a crime was reported. It could be useful to include this information, as police reports, arrests, and charges are only the beginning of the justice system. As technology increases, police agencies are harnessing the power of social media. They share information that is of importance to public safety, such as road blockages due to traffic collisions, or images of wanted suspects. They also post appeals for community assistance when searching for a missing person. Social media posts generate discussion within the community, which can include uproar about potential sentencing of criminals, for example. As part of an open police initiative, an agency should identify whether it is possible to include data on later stages of the justice system, to provide a more comprehensive picture of the process from when a crime is reported to when a person is sentenced or acquitted. My second idea for further discussion is about expanding community engagement. Making information publicly available was discussed earlier, but a police agency could seek to go above and beyond. The U.S. National Police Foundation provides a guide to best practices on the topic of open data. In Part 2 of the guide, a quote from a Michigan police department stated, "Allow the community to help decide what information they want released." This is a very prudent statement, as one of the goals of open data is increased community engagement. How best to achieve this than to generate community conversation on the topic and find out what datasets would be most useful or informative in a specific police community. In conclusion, open government and open data initiatives have been increasing, both in Canada and throughout the world, with technology significantly helping along the way. Government initiatives are creating guidelines, plans, and legislation to support public bodies in moving to a more accountable and transparent era. Privacy professionals have become active players in this quest. Commonly known privacy principles place a lot of value on transparency, openness, and accountability. Privacy legislation includes not only specific guidelines about personal right to privacy, but a right to access public information. The Ontario Privacy Commissioner's message in the 2019 annual report states, "Access to information is a pillar of democracy, upholding the public's right to know how decisions are made and public money is spent." This accountability is critical to promoting trust in public institutions and improving services for citizens. Public institutions can earn the confidence of the public by being open and transparent. I have discussed several examples of agencies that have implemented open data. The UK example seems to be the most successful. They have a nationwide open data portal with every police agency publishing to it. This centralized approach proved to be beneficial and resource efficient. We have also touched on applying an open data principle to police data, with a need for the organization to look at types of data they hold, categorize them, and make a determination on what can be made public. The information predominantly being made open currently is general information, which can be easily published without compromising sensitive or personal information. Some agencies we've seen have moved beyond that to include proactively disclosing access to information requests and sharing body-worn camera footage. I've discussed benefits of open government, including community engagement, accessibility, reduction in resources, and increased accountability. And a few challenges were also raised. Any benefit to the community should be highly promoted because the data essentially belongs to the public, and great care should be taken to build trust in the community. Data usability is significant also because this relates back to the community due to citizens being the ones using the data. Publishing lists of numbers won't be of assistance to most citizens. Police agencies should remember this when determining what to publish and in what format. Budget, too, can be a constraint. It may not be easy to overcome this challenge, as police budgets are hot topics, and services are often required to provide extensive supporting documentation when seeking to add new items to their police budget. Police services will need to be creative and promote their idea to their colleagues nationally and provincially to try and resolve this challenge. The recommendations I presented provide police services with some guidelines they can follow when approaching an open data initiative. I feel the most important recommendation is the first one, establishing a national police open data strategy. However, a question that comes to my mind is, can this decision be made at an individual agency level? This is a point that warrants further discussion, for sure, as adhering to it will present the best opportunity for success. A police service could consider sharing resources with other local agencies they often partner with as a way to utilize resources more efficiently. I believe the next most important recommendation is ease of use for citizens, and clearly identifying the information available in a directory or index. There are many countries which have adopted open government and open data that were not part of this analysis. They each had their own guidelines, plans, and documentation. By learning from these examples, and with all the advents in privacy and technology, an open government and open data initiative can successfully mitigate data privacy and security issues. A police service that implements such an initiative could certainly promote transparency, increase access to data, and have a positive impact on their community. Well, that brings me to the end of the presentation of my paper. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to hearing the presentations on each of your course papers.